Make My Night came after I graduated, and it was inspired by some other experiences I had in the army. And that revolved more around sort of the rituals of drinking. I'm not a teetotaler now, but at the time I was a bit of a mess in the army because I was really depressed at being in Germany doing very little. So I used to join a little community of drinkers, and we used to go out on a regular basis and get absolutely slaughtered. And I kind of saw that reflected in so many other parts of life. I see football players going out and doing this, or rugby players going out and getting hammered, and realised that it was kind of our ritual. It was our passage from sort of the early teenage years up into sort of proving ourselves for manhood. Some people obviously never lose that need and dependence for drink, but others sort of pass through this and then look back in those days with fear and loathing, really. So I decided to recreate some images embodying that sort of spirit, should I say. These were all printed large scale. They were very, very influenced from the sort of snapshot aesthetic, which was really prominent in photography at the time. So people like Nan Golding, for example, and Richard Billingham had just come into the sort of frame at the time, and his work was very prominent in the press at the time. Someone I got to know and work well with. And if you're not familiar with his work, just to remind you what his work looked like. His work, for me, gave a real personal insight into his life. These felt like really honest images. And the need for all of that fancy lighting, all that care about the print quality, about the film I'm shooting on, the camera that I'm shooting, went out the window. It was about what was in the frame. It was about capturing a raw, honest moment. And for him, and I spoke to him a lot about his work, it was about the love of his family. He saw this as his normal life. It was only when it was taken out of that environment and put into the Saatchi gallery or the National Gallery or wherever it ended up, did it suddenly become about something else and about the outsider looking in. So, as I say, I was trying to get a sort of snapshot aesthetic. And that came about by asking lots and lots of my mates to send me images that they'd taken, the most extreme images they'd taken when they were out on the piss. And the type of stuff that came through very, very quickly was very, very sexual, particularly when you put a group of blokes together. Quite a lot of the pictures I couldn't really repeat, or I didn't feel I could repeat at the time anyway, as they were a bit more explicit than the ones I'd shown. But when you look at places like Facebook, Flickr, or anywhere like that now, you just find a mass of these types of images. And there seems to be almost a competition now to see who can do the most extreme style of image, the most silliest sort of drunken moment that can be captured. But when I looked at the framing of it as well, I kind of thought about what happens within the frame. I thought about the way that people think they're acting within the frame, the way they're, in this particular case, the man with the cucumber, I was thinking about people who didn't want to be part of that image, so they're escaping out of the frame, whereas others are crushing themselves in to make sure that they're prominent in that image. Which obviously, when you think about these images, you think the person who's standing in front of their camera is aware that they're having the picture taken. And because they're aware that they're having the picture taken, they're also aware that that picture will be produced and shown at a later date. To someone, we don't know. But they're trying to create an image that then can be later scrutinised by an audience. And they're aware of that when that picture's being taken. So they perform in that certain way because they want to project themselves through the camera in that certain form. Obviously, I hid in a load of signs and secret messages in there just to give a little bits, pieces of extra information. I didn't want people to confuse the fact that I was a bloke in this. So it wasn't about me cross-dressing, in case anyone was confused on that matter. No Photoshop work there, I assure you. The melons, obviously, were just one of those ideas that you sort of think spontaneously, let's do something a bit silly. So it was deliberately supposed to be offensive in some ways. But at the same time, it's kind of something that I would exhibit and people would come along to and say, oh, God, I've done that. Man, I recognise that. Questions that come around are about things like, why is the breakfast plate in the corner of the room? Well, my sister was a student at the time, and I said to her, I need to have a house that looked basically like this, a mess. And I said, after you have your next party, tell me, and don't clear it up in the morning, which there was no fear they were going to do anyway, as they were all in bed when I got up the next day. And I got there, and I had to wake them up to get them to help me set this up and get it going. And I asked about the breakfast because no one was awake, and actually that had been there for 2 days. So it all sort of set like a rubber breakfast, and I thought, well, that's going to stay there then. But there's things like the press picked up on that tiny packet of red ripped cigarette papers in the middle of the table and said this was a drug-fueled, festival type night out. Well, that was such a subtle hint, actually, one of those things that I hadn't really registered at the time, and should have made more of a decision as to whether I wanted it to be viewed in that way or not, because this was more about the booze. I wouldn't recommend this for anyone, as it's completely unpleasant to do. So don't do what I do on the tin, but it is possible. And if you've had enough Guinness, then it's worth a try. But I created this body of work, and I thought to myself, well, I've got to move on, and I've got to do something with this body of work. So I just phoned up the Saatchi gallery, and I said to Charles Saatchi's PA, I'd like to have an appointment to see Charles. And she said, okay, so I made an appointment to see him. At the time, I just thought, oh yeah, that's what you do. But obviously now, looking back on it, I realised how privileged I was to be able to just sort of do that and get away with it, really. So sometimes it's worth being a bit ballsy with these things and just going for it. If you've got an idea and you want to push it forward, just book up an appointment to see someone, see what they say. The worst they'll say is no. So I turned up at Charles Saatchi's gallery, which was it was different from the one it is now. It was quite a funky independent gallery at the time, big space. Presented this work to him, and was hoping that he would be interested in it. He liked it a lot. He asked me how it was presented, talked about the theory behind the work. Then he got his checkbook out and he bought all of the work, 12 prints again, plus about 3 more of the Army series that I'd produced since I last saw him. So I mean, I wasn't expecting that at the time, but it then funded nearly a year of my life, plus all the equipment and stuff that I needed to keep going working. So, again, I made use of that. I made sure the press knew about this. I started having quite a lot of very, very high-profile galleries around the world taking interest in my work at this point. Charles Saatchi was very good at contacts, so he would let people know, show them the work when they came over to visit. And I ended up being represented by about 7 galleries worldwide, big-name commercial galleries, who would sell my work for me on my behalf, exhibit my work. So I would then create a body of work and it would rotate round. So it was putting me into a position where I could genuinely just concentrate on being an artist. Now this one is kind of the cycle of the work. This is probably the most unpleasant image that I've ever produced. So, well, maybe you won't think so later. But it's only carrot soup, so don't worry about it. And the reason that this one was so important for me, because in a way, this was where this series started. In that after I graduated from the RCA, myself and quite a few of my friends decided we'd have a bit of a celebration, and we ended up going back to my house and I ended up anyway in this sort of state. And one of my nice photographic friends picked up my camera from the side that I owned, took lots of pictures of me curled around the toilet in a similar situation, and a few worse than this, put the camera back on the shelf, and then he sort of left it there. A couple of days later, when I wanted to do a shoot, the film was finished. I thought, oh, that's weird, I don't remember that. Took it to Boots, got it processed, and of course this extremely embarrassing array of photographs appeared from what the rest of my student friends had done to me. But it was this idea of a memory, evidence that I was there, maybe in body, not soul, but it inspired me. It made me think, this is a whole genre of photography that I could then use and explore. I'm just going to take a little break from this for a second so you can once again kick back and relax, because I'm now going to show a video that expands that series of work slightly. So I've just got to cut out of this. Okay, I'll just run it for a little while, allow you to watch it, and then enable you to watch, and then you can ask questions or I can talk about it for a little bit.